What if I told you that deep in the shadowed corners of Middle-earth's history lies a meeting that would change everything we think we know about power, immortality, and the nature of good and evil? A conversation between two beings so fundamentally different yet eerily similar that Tolkien himself might have hesitated to write it. Today we're diving into the theoretical encounter between Tom Bombadil and Glorfindel that never made it to the pages but haunts the margins of possibility. Picture this scenario. The year is 1640 of the Third Age. Rivendell stands as a beacon of wisdom while shadows gather in the north. Glorfindel, the mighty elf lord who faced down the Balrog of Gondolin and returned from the halls of Mandos, receives a message that troubles even his ancient heart. Reports speak of a strange being dwelling in the old forest, one who seems untouched by the growing darkness, immune to powers that should bind all living things. The Council of Elrond needs answers about this enigma called Tom Bombadil. But here's where it gets fascinating. Glorfindel doesn't approach this mission like a typical diplomatic encounter. He's fought demons, witnessed the fall of hidden cities, and walked between life and death. Yet something about the reports of this forest dweller makes him uneasy, not with fear, but with a profound uncertainty that cuts deeper than any sword. Because Glorfindel knows power when he sees it, and what he's hearing about Tom Bombadil doesn't fit any category of power he understands. The journey from Rivendell to the Old Forest becomes more than mere travel. As Glorfindel moves through the wilds of Eriador, he notices something peculiar. The closer he gets to Bombadil's domain, the more the world seems to shift around him. Ancient paths that should lead straight begin to curve. Streams flow in directions that defy the lay of the land. It's as if reality itself becomes more fluid, more playful, less bound by the rigid laws that govern the rest of Middle-earth. This isn't dark magic. This isn't the twisted sorcery of Sauron or the subtle manipulations of Saruman. This is something else entirely, something that doesn't seek to dominate or control, but simply exists in harmony with forces that predate the very concept of dominion. Glorfindel, with his millennia of experience, recognizes he's entering a realm where his usual understanding of power dynamics might not apply. When the meeting finally occurs, it doesn't happen as either being might expect. Glorfindel arrives at the edge of the old forest in full ceremonial armor, bearing the authority of Rivendell and the wisdom of Valinor. He expects to find either a hermit hiding from the world's troubles, or perhaps some remnant of the Ainur playing at being mortal. Instead, he discovers Tom Bombadil rescuing a family of hedgehogs from a fallen log, singing nonsense verses about their tiny troubles with the same gravity other beings reserve for matters of war and death. The conversation that follows challenges everything Glorfindel thought he knew about wisdom, power, and responsibility. Tom greets him not with the reverence most show an elf lord of his stature, but with genuine curiosity about his golden hair and the stories it might tell. There's no political maneuvering, no careful diplomatic language, just an ancient being delighting in the presence of another ancient being, like children comparing collections of interesting stones. But beneath this surface simplicity lies something that unsettles Glorfindel profoundly. When he attempts to discuss the growing threat of Sauron, the spreading shadow, the need for all free peoples to unite against the darkness, Tom listens with the patience of stone and the attention of flowing water. Then he responds with questions that cut to the heart of everything Glorfindel believes about duty and sacrifice. Why must the darkness be fought with more darkness? Why should joy be abandoned in favor of grim determination? What victory is worth achieving if it costs the very things that make victory meaningful? These aren't the questions of someone naive about evil's nature. These are the questions of someone who has seen patterns repeat across ages and wonders if there might be another way. Glorfindel finds himself defending positions he's never questioned before: the necessity of taking up arms against evil, the importance of organizing resistance, the duty of the powerful to protect the weak. Each argument he makes sounds reasonable in his own ears, yet somehow loses its certainty when reflected back through Tom's gentle but penetrating questions. Then comes the moment that changes everything. Tom asks Glorfindel to explain the Ring of Power, and as the Elf Lord describes its terrible allure, its capacity to corrupt even the noblest hearts, Tom nods with understanding that seems deeper than mere comprehension. He speaks of the ring not as an object of power, but as a trap disguised as a gift, a question posed to the world about what beings truly value. When Glorfindel mentions that the ring has no effect on Tom, expecting perhaps some explanation about his nature or origins, Tom simply smiles and says something that haunts the Elf Lord for centuries afterward. He suggests that the ring only has power over those who want power, and that the real question isn't how to resist its influence, but why anyone would want what it offers in the first place. This perspective shakes Glorfindel's worldview to its foundations. He's spent millennia understanding power as a tool to be wielded responsibly, evil as a force to be opposed with strength, wisdom as the careful application of knowledge in service of good. But Tom presents an alternative that seems almost incomprehensible, yet undeniably valid. What if power itself is the problem? What if opposition only feeds what it seeks to destroy? What if wisdom sometimes means choosing not to act? The philosophical challenge becomes deeply personal when Tom asks about Glorfindel's own journey. The death in Gondolin, the return from Mandos, the long ages of service in Middle-earth. Was it duty that brought him back, or something else? Was his opposition to darkness truly selfless, or did it serve some need within himself to matter, to be significant, to leave a mark on the world? These questions don't come with judgment or accusation. Tom asks them with the same innocent curiosity he might show toward a flower's reason for blooming or a bird's motivation for singing, but they force Glorfindel to examine motivations he's never questioned, to consider whether his millennia of heroic service might contain elements of ego, of attachment to outcome, of subtle forms of the very desire. For significance that the ring exploits, the conversation takes an unexpected turn when they discuss time itself. Glorfindel experiences time as a river flowing toward some ultimate resolution, each moment building toward either triumph or tragedy. Tom experiences time as a dance, each moment complete in itself, neither more nor less significant than any other. This fundamental difference in perception explains why they approach problems so differently. For Glorfindel, the Third Age represents a critical juncture where choices made now will determine the fate of all free peoples for ages to come. For Tom, the Third Age is simply another melody in an endless song, no more or less important than the melodies that came before or will come after. This doesn't make him callous to suffering or indifferent to evil, but it gives him a perspective that transcends the urgency that drives most other beings. When Glorfindel presses him about responsibility, about the duty of the powerful to act, Tom responds with a demonstration rather than argument. He shows how his presence in the old forest creates a space where different rules apply. Trees that elsewhere might be twisted by shadow grow straight and strong. Waters that elsewhere might carry pollution run clear and sweet. Creatures that elsewhere might flee in terror approach without fear. This isn't achieved through constant vigilance or active intervention. It emerges naturally from Tom's way of being, from his fundamental contentment with existence as it is. His protection of the old forest doesn't come from fighting against threats, but from creating a space so filled with life and joy that darkness cannot take root. It's a completely different model of how good might triumph over evil. The implications of this approach trouble Glorfindel deeply. If Tom's method works, if spaces of pure contentment can indeed resist corruption without conflict, what does that say about the necessity of war? What does it suggest about all the battles fought, all the lives lost, all the sacrifices made in the name of opposing evil? Has there always been another way, one that required no swords, no strategies, no organization of resistance? But Tom gently challenges this line of thinking as well. His way works for him, in his place with his nature. It's not a universal solution, not a strategy that others can simply adopt. Different beings have different roles in the great song of creation. Glorfindel's path of heroic resistance has its own validity, its own necessity. The mistake would be in thinking that any single approach is the only correct one. This leads to perhaps the most profound moment in their encounter. Tom suggests that the real enemy isn't Sauron or any particular manifestation of evil, but the tendency to believe that there's only one right way to live, one correct response to challenges, one true understanding of how things should be. Evil doesn't just corrupt through temptation, it corrupts through the insistence that its way is the only way, that all must serve or be destroyed. Glorfindel realizes that even good can fall into this trap. The alliance against Sauron, necessary as it is, operates on the assumption that all free peoples must unite under a single strategy, must coordinate their efforts, must subordinate their individual approaches to a greater collective purpose. There's wisdom in this, but also danger. What happens to diversity of thought, to individual paths, to alternative ways of being good, when everything becomes militarized against a common threat? Tom embodies the importance of maintaining spaces outside the great conflicts, not through isolation or indifference, but through a different kind of service. His refusal to join the war isn't cowardice or selfishness, it's a recognition that someone needs to preserve the memory of what peace looks like, what joy feels like, what life can be, when it's not defined by what it opposes. As their conversation draws toward a close, Glorfindel finds himself changed in ways he doesn't fully understand. His commitment to opposing Sauron remains unshaken, but it's now accompanied by a deeper understanding of why that opposition matters. It's not just about defeating evil, it's about preserving the possibility for beings like Tom to exist, for spaces like the old forest to flourish, for ways of life that don't fit neatly into anyone's grand strategy. The parting between them is unlike any diplomatic farewell Glorfindel has ever experienced. There are no formal agreements, no commitments to future cooperation, no exchange of tokens or promises. Tom simply thanks him for the conversation, mentions that he's learned something interesting about the way starlight looks when it reflects off properly polished armor, and wanders off to check on a family of rabbits he's been worried about. Glorfindel returns to Rivendell with more questions than answers, but they're better questions than he left with. His report to Elrond is unlike any intelligence briefing ever given. He describes Tom not as a potential ally or threat, but as a living reminder of truths that are easily forgotten in times of crisis. He recommends that Tom be left alone, not because he's harmless, but because his particular form of power serves purposes that transcend the immediate concerns of war and politics. The ripple effects of this meeting extend far beyond the immediate participants. Elrond's understanding of the complexities facing Middle-earth deepens. The eventual decision to send the ring to Mount Doom is influenced in part by recognition that some forms of power are too dangerous to exist, regardless of who wields them. The knowledge that someone like Tom exists, someone for whom such power holds no appeal, validates the choice to destroy rather than use. Years later, when Glorfindel helps Arwen reach the ford of Bruinen, when he plays his part in the great events that reshape Middle-earth, he carries with him insights gained from that long conversation in the Old Forest. His heroism is tempered by humility, his strength balanced by awareness of its limitations, his commitment to good enriched by understanding that good takes many forms. The meeting that never was between Tom Bombadil and Glorfindel represents something essential about Tolkien's vision of how wisdom emerges through encounter between different ways of understanding reality. Neither character is diminished by exposure to the other's perspective. Both are enriched. Neither abandons their essential nature, but both discover new depths within it. In the end, perhaps the most important thing about this imagined encounter is what it suggests about the nature of heroism itself. True heroes aren't those who never question their path, but those who remain open to learning even from sources that challenge their fundamental assumptions. True wisdom isn't the accumulation of correct answers, but the cultivation of better questions. And true power isn't the ability to impose one's will, but the capacity to recognize when different approaches serve the same essential purpose. The conversation between Tom and Glorfindel that Tolkien never wrote reminds us that his world contains space for radically different ways of being good, different approaches to the same essential challenges, different songs contributing to the same endless music. In our own world, perhaps we need similar conversations, similar encounters between different forms of wisdom, similar recognition that the biggest problems often require not just one heroic solution, but multiple approaches working in harmony like instruments in an orchestra. What would you ask if you could sit in on such a conversation? What assumptions about power, wisdom, and responsibility might be worth questioning? The magic of Middle-earth isn't just in its dragons and elves, but in its capacity to help us imagine better questions about the world we actually inhabit.